Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Talking Success. We've had a bit of a delay in between the last couple of episodes. I think it's just because of the time of year, and here in South Africa, April is basically like December. There's more time off than there is time in. But I'm delighted to be back, and with a very, very special guest, someone that I've got to know pretty well over the last maybe 3.5 years, maybe even slightly longer. So I'm joined by Nevellan Moodley, who is a partner at BDO in the financial services practice. As I said, Nev and I have had many exchanges over the years, both online and offline as well. So we have actually met each other in person, had a few breakfasts together, and shared a glass of wine or two. So, Nev, listen, it's great to have you on board. Thank you. I'm going to do a quick intro on kind of in my words, and then I'm going to hand over to you. But I think just around BDO as a firm, many people will know BDO as an accounting firm and an audit firm, which is obviously the grounding of that. But it's a lot broader, and I think myself as a customer of BDO's, going back probably 5 years, can testify to it's not just about audit, and it's not just about sort of compliance. There's a whole advisory piece, which is I know where you sit, Nev, and the focus or the subject matter expertise that the firm has globally across financial services, and I suppose more recently, but you can fill us in on the fintech sector itself, which is obviously what we're talking about today. So that's kind of my intro. And anyway, that's when I'm speaking to people and they say, do you know a good firm? I go, yeah, BDO. And that's kind of the pitch I give. But I'm sure there's a bit more to it, and you could be a bit more eloquent than I can. So if you could give a really short intro into yourself and then into BDO as a firm, and then I've got like a million questions for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Darren, and thank you for having me on here. Yeah, I think we have shared a few glasses of wine, and it's been lovely interacting with you over the last 3 years. So I'll tell you first a little bit about BDO. So I've been at BDO now, starting my 6th year with BDO. And one of the things that drew me to BDO at the time was they were one of the fastest growing professional services in the world, and they've still maintained that. So the BDO I joined 6 years ago and the BDO today, it's absolutely incredible, the amount of growth that the firm has experienced. So yeah, we in a lot of countries across the world. I think it's over 120, 130 odd countries. I can give you the exact numbers. And we cover across the entire continent. Now, BDO is pretty new to financial services, and it's an area that the firm wants to strategically grow. So at the time when we had moved across quite a number of people of us from an ex-Big Four firm, or a Big Four firm. And in moving across, one of the things we wanted to do was build a world-class financial services practice that was ready to service and ready to do what was necessary in the market. And we also, I think most of us had experience at the previous Big Four firms, and we wanted to bring something fresh. So when it comes to fintech, I'll touch a little bit on advisory, but let's talk about fintech very quickly. So when I joined BDO, I met a gentleman named Tim Aman, and he was based in Australia, and he's had the pleasure of living, I think, over 7 or 8 countries globally. And he got in touch with me as soon as I joined because I'd expressed interest in fintech. And he was the head of fintech in Australia and later got appointed as the global head of fintech for BDO. And in my discussions with him, he said, listen, we're trying to set up a fintech network across the globe. Will you be the caretaker for Africa? I said, yeah, of course. So during that time, I was able to meet with a lot of the people across the African continent, north, west, east, even southern Africa. And I've almost got a person in each of the respective countries who have helped me out with thought leadership pieces, helped me with certain clients. In fact, we recently had a client who wanted to move into Africa, almost to navigate the regulatory, navigate the tax, navigate the crypto landscape and application. So those are the things we've done. We operate well as a global network. We connect together as a global group at least once a year in person. And the rest of the time we're meeting monthly. So that's a great network. And I think one needs to look at BDO where they come from. It comes from a firm born out of entrepreneurial spirit. So the match between ourselves as a culture versus fintech as a culture, it's found a natural match, Darren. I think you've probably seen that in your interactions with the firm. So it's a saying that some of our partners say, everyone's always looking at how to make a buck and how to make a buck better in the next time you try. So yeah, quite an exciting space that's merging the big, bold financial services with some of this entrepreneurial culture. So fintech for us sits at a nice intersection between the two.
And when we say fintech, it's really broad, right? I think everyone these days is a fintech. You know, whether you're offering traditional financial services, you're offering payments, you're doing lending, you're even in the world of e-com, right? People are branding themselves as, you know, I'm a fintech or we're a fintech. What's the definition from a BDO perspective, or does it not really matter? I mean, if you're sort of using financial technology, whether it be on B2B or whether it be on B2C, is there no difference in terms of a BDO perspective on what fintech is as an industry?
Yeah, now, Wald, it's an interesting question, right? So I'll tell you how it works in reality, and then I'll tell you the textbook answer, right? In reality, because remember, we work, so for my sins, I'm qualified as a chartered accountant in 2011. I'm told that if you spend a little bit of time with me, I'm the furthest away from your typical chartered accountant you're ever going to find. I've got no grey suits in the cupboard at all. So what happens in a firm like ours, when anybody hears anything around exponential technology or someone talking quite tech heavy, that's the cue for audit partners to get very, very scared. So what happens is they then end up phoning me and I end up going in. So where there's payments, AI, blockchain, digitization, digital platform, anything around digital partnerships, most of the time I am getting a call to come in with the fintech team. Now, that's the South African version. There are other markets across the world that are a little bit more defined in terms of it. So, my strong view at the moment is that fintech is a way of doing things. So, whether you're a large corporate, you can have fintech within it. And I think in the South African example, you can see what Sanlam's done, creating their own fintech division, First Rand creating their own fintech division. And then you've got actual pure fintechs, some who are pure startup and some that are more sort of hitting unicorn sort of level. So we're starting to target. So I'm quite passionate personally about the real grassroots, meaning where someone's got an idea, how do we take it, how do we do it? So I mean, I've done quite a bit of work with a company called Specno, sort of just help startups from the thought of an idea all the way to having something tangible. But from a BDO side of it, we tend to get involved when you're like ready, you're starting to make some revenue, you've proved the concept, and you're starting to go along, you're starting to expand the business. You may be looking to raise some equity, raise some funding for the business. We can help you get everything in order. Or in some instances, listen, I'm a fintech founder. I've got no time to do VAT tax or prepare financial records. Guys, please take this off my bat. So there's numerous angles that we take. But in terms of the definition, I mean, we put the client at the center. Whether it's getting serviced from a fintech capability, an accounting capability, a tax capability, it doesn't really matter. And what we try and do is we try to grow with the fintech. So, I mean, I'm sure everybody wants to do work for Meta once they reach the size they are, or Apple. So what our BDO strategy has been globally is to find these clients before everybody else is interested in them, and on the back of loyalty and good and strong relationships, actually grow with those clients into whatever BDO service they are interested in growing with us on. And that, I think, globally, from some of the feedback I've received from our global head of fintech, has been a very successful strategy because, as you know, fintechs and fintech founders, from the experiences they've been through, one of the things they learn to appreciate is loyalty. So anyone who's willing to help them when no one else wants to help them, it's not a case of, listen, this is better, or this is more money, or this is less money. They tend to appreciate loyalty, which actually works really well with where us as a brand are positioned at the moment as well.
Yeah, and you know what, Nev, I've been a customer of or client of BDOs for a number of years, and again, this is not a sales pitch. I'm not I'm not employed by you guys, but I think that the one thing that's always struck me is that ability to have kind of not just a central point of contact, but to be able to pick up the phone and say, "Listen, I've got something I don't quite understand it. Who's the best person to speak to?" And it being filtered and the right person sort of being on that call, whether it be on tax, whether it be on compliance, whether it be on the business outsourcing or the business process outsourcing side. So I'm kind of testament to that. I'm interested though, Dev. You spoke about sort of engaging with fintechs at relatively early stages. I think there's also perhaps a misconception or a misunderstanding that, you go to an accounting firm or an advisory firm and it's going to cost, hundreds of thousands of rand, just to sort of get in front of them. Every time I pick up the phone, kind of the clock's ticking or sending an email. And I think for an earlier stage fintech, we'll talk about the scale ups and the enterprise shortly, but for the earlier stage fintechs, maybe sitting there going, I don't know if I can, we can stomach this. This is a big cost for something that may be in the future. So if I'm looking at, restructuring the business, I might want to have, an offshore entity, or I might want to, move IP from one country to another. Is this the best route for me to go down? I guess there's the chicken and the egg. If you don't take that advice and you go ahead and do it, and you do it incorrectly, then it's going to open a huge can of worms. But what would you say to maybe the early stage fintechs that are listening to this, going, listen, this sounds great, and we'd love to get some of this advice, but times are tough at the moment.
So I think, Darren, one of the nice things about BDO is because of that entrepreneurial culture and ability that we've got. One of the things we've seen is some of our competitors in this field have sort of turned off these services because they didn't find it to be as profitable. So I'll give you an example. We've got an area within BDO called StatuCore. And what this team helps people do is actually as simple as setting up a company. How do we put all the documents in place, get it registered, get a company registration number, and get that done? Which is something, irrespective of how big or how small you are, is something you would want to do. And it's often something that we would start off as a relationship builder. And then obviously based on looking at the business and understanding, now there's probably thousands out there that want to do it. But like with everyone else, there's certain ones that will catch your eye in terms of, listen, this is what we're looking for. So I think it's about pitching to us as well as if we're investors, because we theoretically, not that we'll take equity in your business, but we're perfectly well aware we cannot come with our full rates on day one and put them on the table. We can start with some really discounted rates right up front, get you into the stable as one of our bets that we've taken, and then hopefully as you grow, our rates grow, our fees grow, and your businesses grow as well, which has always been the way we've looked at it. So I think from my side, the way I sort of view it is, any client, irrespective of who you are, and if you're a startup fintech, I think you don't realize this, but you are pitching literally every hour of every day. Sometimes it's someone to come and do a piece of work for you. I mean, even if you needed to get a building, chances are you've got no proof, no collateral. But guess what? There'll probably be a landlord out there who'll be like, I like what you're saying. Let's try it out for 6 months and let's see how it goes. So I think in this world that is quite saturated, it's about being different, profiling yourself in the right way. And I've got so many examples, Darren, that I could share with you of clients who've even reached out via our website, even directly to me. And I said, no, that looks really interesting. I'll take the meeting. But you get someone looking for a brochure, and then you're like, no, that's probably not one that I'm going to respond to in a rush, right? Because you can see where it's heading. So I looked at
send me some more information. Yeah, send me some more information. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's just take this conversation a step forward. You're clearly extremely, you and the firm are clearly very well networked and connected within the fintech ecosystem. Let's talk with an African lens, if we may.
Sure, yes.
What are some of the trends you're seeing? I'm just going to preface that before you answer. Payments clearly is 60% of the market, but that leaves 40% of the market that people don't necessarily focus on. All the sort of other areas around fintech, the services around fintech. So when we look at reg tech and we look at wealth tech and we look at insure tech, what are you seeing over the last? Again, we can't look too far back, otherwise, it's literally going back in time. Anything further than 6 months in the world of fintech is like prehistoric, right? So let's take a view maybe from this year, from 2025. What are some of the themes you are seeing here in Africa?
Africa, yeah. I always say, even to my global colleagues, I explain to them, I'm like, you know what? Fintech for us is something that's been around probably 20, 30 years in South Africa. Because if you look at when the telcos first started up, Darren, if you look at their airtime distribution model as the first sort of starting point, they had no brick and mortar to distribute airtime. So what they did was they offered great percentages on selling airtime. I think it was up to 20, 30% at the time when they started. And that's how they got their distribution network. And when you look across the African continent, you look at the M-Pesas of the world and some of the fintechs that are out there. In fact, I was recently involved, Darren, just an interesting story for everybody. I was involved in a due diligence on a fintech acquisition across Africa. And would you believe it if I told you one of the findings we picked up as a negative around the acquisition was the tech was outdated. I mean, have you ever heard of a fintech with tech being outdated? So now we've got these global people, primarily out of the UK and the US, and we are writing a finding on this technology and saying, listen, this tech is 15, 20 years old. And one of the founders actually got involved and said, listen, can we have a meeting? He's like, how can a fintech have outdated tech? And we need to change the entire infrastructure. And I explained to him, I said, this is how long they've been in business. He didn't even consider it to think how long they've been in business, but sizable company, sizable amount of money. But I think when we're looking across Africa, Darren, what we're seeing at the moment is, and I don't know if this is really a sector, so the banks are definitely playing aggressively in payments. We're seeing that. But what I'm also seeing is everyone who's not a bank, very interested as retailers to say, I mean, most of the CEOs I've engaged with across, well, East Africa is a start, but even the broader Africa, speaking to my other colleagues, they're looking for 2 to 3% of their revenue base to be payment revenue, which I think is quite interesting. And if I have to be brutally honest with you, I think across the continent there are a couple of exceptions, but I think everyone seems to be ending up in payments. So we've got people who started as insurtechs ending up in payments. We've got people starting in lending, even agricultural lending, looking at the end goal being a payments network. And I think a big part of that reason is, and again, this is a personal view from all the interactions that I've had, I don't think disruptions outside of the payment space is going to be driven necessarily. I think fintechs will enable it, but when we'll really see the disruption in the wealth tech, the insurtech space of the world, is when the large corporates, either with the global footprint across Africa or in the specific countries, decide, listen, we're going to play in this space. Because I think the knowledge gap is just far too big. So let me just explain that to everyone. So let's take credit as an example. Credit, when it comes to retail credit or corporate credit, is so complicated. The best people who understand that credit are actually sitting in banks, corporate banks or retail banks across the continent, right? Now you've got a guy who wants to start a startup. He might have a credit person nowhere near as skilled as what the banks have. And if it's a guy who's left a bank and trying to do it, nowhere near enough capital to execute what they need to do. So I think what I've seen a lot across the African continent, to summarize, is I've seen a lot of fintechs in the different areas outside of payments, all eventually ending up in payments. And what's been most interesting for me is I think the disruption outside of payments is probably going to be corporate driven, so corporate backed, corporate funded, with some of the fintechs either getting collapsed or getting partnered into it to make it happen. And fintech founders are difficult at the easiest of times. So they've got a set vision. If that vision, and I've even seen some of them walk away from a lot of money because the vision didn't match. Something very difficult for corporate investors to understand. So when I look at the continent as a whole, I think the other mistake that we make, Darren, is if I look at East Africa and Southern Africa, it's probably the closest in terms of where regulation is heading, some of the complexities, some of the challenges. When I look at West Africa, right, and again, if I look at the west of Africa, challenges are very, very different in those countries. And then when I look at North Africa, they seem to be following more what the Middle East and Europe seem to be doing in terms of their way. In fact, I had the pleasure of meeting a client out of Morocco recently who said to me, so I asked him, so do you consider yourself to be part of Africa, or where do you consider yourself to be a part of? His answer was, we're a geological event away from being part of Middle East or Europe. Depends which way the geological event hits us. So we had a good laugh about it, but he said to me after that, he said, that's how we view ourselves. And he said, I think you're going to have a similar view in Egypt as well. He said, we don't actually see ourselves as African. So if you look at that, just that whole construct across Africa, I mean, I had a laugh when someone said to me the other day, what if we combine all of the countries in Africa in the continent, similar to the United States of Africa? I'm like, if you thought the USA was difficult to combine, I think the African territories are probably going to be probably impossible, if I'm being honest with you. So I think we need to look at it differently.
So, even to conceptualize merging Joburg and Cape Town is probably something that movies as well, right? So, yeah, including 52 other countries, that's going to be a challenge. You know, it's interesting. My thoughts, maybe slightly different to
Yep.
yours, and we can debate this. Is that the fintechs that we've seen pop up over the last 5 or 6 years, and even if we use the UK or Europe as an example, we look at Revolut, or in Africa we look at Kuda, or we look at just thinking some of the other sort of B2C offerings that are out there. They start with a wallet. They start with a payment, right? I can do peer-to-peer payments. And even Time Bank, to some extent, kind of started that way. So you can do peer-to-peer payments, which effectively should be zero cost, right? I know if you and I are Revolut customers, or you and I are Time Bank customers, or F&B customers, we can send funds to each other, and it's at no cost. And I think there's been a lot of pressure over, certainly in the last couple of years, on margins for PSPs. Okay, because there isn't a huge amount that distinguishes between one PSP and another. What it tends to be now is more the value-added service in the ecosystem that's around that, and the ease of integration. So if I have a Shopify store, for example, I'm talking sort of MMSE, but if I have a Shopify store and actually I can go and use, I can name names, Peach, or I use PayFast, or I use someone else. I can just plug straight in and put in my API key and or my username and account, and I'm up and running, right? Which is super simple. I think from a larger merchant perspective as well, and we look at the ShopRights, or we look at the Pick and Pays, or the Take Lots, they pump so much volume that the capability they have to squeeze the PSPs in terms of margin almost makes it a zero sum gain. And I think that's the challenge that we're seeing globally. I'm going to ask you about stablecoins, and I'm going to ask you about that landscape and how that may affect. I was having a debate with someone last night on X about, where does a scheme fit in if there is a stable coin, if a merchant has a stable coin wallet, consumer has a stable coin wallet, and I can literally just send funds there. What's the need for a scheme, right? Why is there card fees? Why is there transaction fees if I'm doing effectively a peer-to-peer payment? We'll come on to that. But in terms of what I've said around that, value-added services, around the whole payments piece. Again, what's your view? And bearing in mind what we're seeing with a lot of payments companies is they're either partnering with credit firms. Okay, so they're offering credit straight based off balance sheet or based off turnover. And we're seeing a lot of innovation starting to happen, but a lot of disruption happening at the same place with PayShap and stablecoins and what have you. Would you agree, or are you seeing something different?
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%, Darren. I think a concept that I've picked up, I mean, they call it the sort of connected platform, right? The consumer is no longer attracted to a specific product or an individual product. They're attracted to the platform, right? So if we look at some interesting sort of use cases, I mean, just look at the South African market as a start. I think understanding the customer is probably something that a lot of our corporates really struggle to do because they take a single view, a single dimensional view, rather than a 3, 4, even a 7-dimensional view. So the one that's interested me the most has probably been Discovery. I mean, their ecosystem of products, how they are able to put, I mean, you don't even feel the payment. You don't feel it at all, really. You would never say, in fact, as a person who doesn't see the models and look at these models all the time, you would not see that that is a massive payments ecosystem that they've set up. And every time you're paying, the vitality rewards are also coming. So, for example, you take a life insurance, you also pay for it on the platform, you then see it coming. And I think one of the reasons for Discovery's success is how they've been able to intertwine the data into the decision making and then build the services around the customer, knowing full well they're going to use it, right? And I think that's where if you were a traditional, like it's actually scary that we're even having this discussion. If you were a traditional payments provider or even a fintech payment provider, if you haven't evolved your thinking into partnering and understanding consumer life cycles and how it fits in, you're probably going to be close to out of business or on the decline at the moment, I would suspect. And I think that the key reason behind that is you've ignored the ecosystem that goes behind payment. No one wants to buy payments as a service. Everyone wants to go, I want to go into the Discovery Mall, buy all my stuff. I want to get Discovery Miles. I want to get it cheap on what every second Thursday or Black Friday. And then you get people who've bought into it. That's what they've actually bought. And then in doing that, all of the sub-services thereafter, they end up purchasing and taking it on. That being said, I think Discovery is a drop in the ocean, if I'm being honest with you. I think there's so many other ecosystems that we're going to see develop over a period of time. And it's interesting to see just some of the e-commerce battles. So you can almost see it. Discovery's gone with Checkers and Woolworths. Pick and Pay fell out of the mix. Pick and Pay has now gone with F&B. They've gone sort of their own way. I'm just screwing me up. I actually forget now. Standard Bank, they went with... I can't remember who they went with. But each one is sort of now deciding, right, what is this offering? What does it look like? And what no one's sort of talking about at the moment is that there's quite a solid payments ecosystem underlying it. And for me, I think that's where the future of this thing lies, Darren. I think payments becomes the hidden service, and we then sell the rest of the services. And then from all the data that you acquire, you should be able to make a good decision. Do I lend? Do I want to... the specific client, how do I know that they want to go on a holiday to the Maldives? Well, how do I get more information on them so I can actually push it through for them? So, that's what my sort of thought process is.
Yeah, I think on the customer journey and the customer experience, I posted this publicly last week. I set up a Discovery Bank account for the first time, and I was blown away by the ease, the speed, the just intuitive nature of the app and how they've built this. And I ended up calling support because I think a good sign of any company is kind of how they support you. So I ended up calling support with a really, really stupid question. I was connected to a very, very polite lady within a minute, less than that. Who then did a screen share on my phone and was like literally pointing, going, "Look, you click here." And I mean, it was a stupid question. I felt like a complete idiot for asking, but she literally talked me through this, and I was left going, "Wow." To do that, or to have that kind of experience with an incumbent bank, and I won't mention any names, you got no chance. You have to wait 2 weeks for someone to, pick up the support ticket. So I do agree with you. I think it's about, understanding the customer journey. I feel there's an area of disruption that perhaps hasn't been looked at yet, which is business banking on the SME side. Again, my experience, or our experience over the last decade or so with incumbent banks here in South Africa hasn't been great.